Tonight's webinar is Pots for Pollinators, and the speaker for tonight is Alicia Whitaker. She is a master gardener since 2021. She has long been a home gardener and an active participant in the East End gardening community. She is the past president and board member of the Horticultural Alliance of the Hamptons and the first vice president and horticultural chair of the Westhampton Garden Club. She works as an executive leadership coach and a consultant supports her gardening to support her gardening habit. She is also an active member of the Suffolk Alliance for Pollinators. She holds a BA from the University of Massachusetts and an MBA from Harvard Business School. So Alicia, take it away.
Thanks everybody for being here. I look forward to your questions. So I became interested in this topic because I live on a small property. I have a hedge that kind of cuts it in half, and the front half is the deer zone, and the other half is where my house, pool, some borders are, and a big brick patio. And I'm a plant nut, so I had to learn how to meet my need to have more plants and to have beauty around me. And the answer was having a lot of pots. So I've had big containers for several years now, but about 4 years ago, when I became more aware of pollinators, I've started making them more about not just about beauty, but also about supporting pollinators. So, what's the deal here? We all know if you found your way to rewild, you know that we're in a big crisis. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We're going to talk about guidelines for success in planting your pots, including soil, water, fertilizer. We're going to spend most of our time talking about native perennials that you can use in containers, as well as superstar pollinator-friendly annuals and vines. And my own philosophy is that using the two makes a big difference for pollinators, largely because perennials have a limited bloom period. And even if we plan for a succession of bloom, there are gaps that are filled by annuals that bloom their head off from May through November. So we know we're in a crisis, that insects and bird populations are declining. Last year, we thought that eastern monarchs were doing better, but then there was a problem with their wintering grounds. We continue, especially on the East End, we keep hearing about pesticides and herbicides in our drinking water and in the aquifer. And you get to thinking, what in the hell can I do as an individual? And one of the ways we can make a giant difference is by planting natives and pollinator plants and providing support in the form of host plants, as well as nectar and pollen to bees and other pollinators. So all of us are probably involved in restoring habitats, providing those host plants in our gardens, in the actual ground. Huge issue, not using insecticides. What we keep hearing here in the Hamptons is that there's a non-toxic, organic mosquito killer. It kills everything, not just mosquitoes. We're also over time reducing the size of our lawns by planting natives and pollinator plants and creating more gardens. So what I want to talk about is using our pots as pit stops, especially useful at each end of the season, the beginning and the end. So very quickly, who are we talking about in terms of pollinators? If you look at Duong's screen, you can see that behind her, she has the full poster of this Backyard Bees of North America. Native bees are under great pressure, and there are so many types of them with different needs with different plants. Wasps are also very important pollinators, and there are two that are a pain in the butt, and it's the German yellow jacket and the Western yellow jacket. But the rest are pretty non-aggressive, and when you tune into what's on your plants, you'll often see wasps playing a very important role as pollinators. And of course, we shouldn't forget that we have moths, very important as night pollinators, bats, beetles, and hoverflies that look a lot like bees, but they're in fact flies. And of course, our favorite Barbie doll, um, bird, hummingbirds. So, what we want to go for in our pot plantings is not only beauty, but sustenance. We want to find a way to meet the needs of some of these pollinators, not all of them, but some of them, so that we're not just a pretty face. We're providing more nourishment. So we're going to talk about the mixes you can use of natives and annuals. In terms of pots, bigger is better, especially if you're going to use native perennials, because with more room for roots and moisture, things dry out less and you're more successful. Diversity is good. We all know that we need to plant milkweed somewhere. Don't plant only milkweed, plant a bunch of other things that provide nectar and pollen, as well as provide the kinds of services that milkweed does. Soil really matters. We keep hearing that, natives can take poor soil and don't need any kind of coddling in terms of, when we plant them outside in our borders. But a pot is an artificial environment. We need good soil in there. So what I do, and I recommend you do, is add compost to your soil. When I make a mix that is essentially 2/3 potting soil and 1/3 compost. And what's happened over time is that more of the potting soil companies are understanding the need for something that's more than sawdust. A few years ago, a lot of the pot mixes we used to buy were, you know, didn't have any nourishment. And I noticed that pretty much all of them now are including more organic matter. But if you have a compost pile, lucky you, add that compost. If you don't have a compost pile, you can buy compost or get it at local dumps pretty reliably for free. But, in terms of the magic bullet for most of our plants, compost is it. So make that mix. Don't just use normal garden soil because it's too dense. You want to have space in that pot for oxygen to reach the roots as well as water. And again, we think that, gee, if we plant natives, we don't need to water them. Any plant in a pot needs to have water. It's an artificial environment. There's limited soil available to the roots. So depending on where you have it in your property, you need to water deeply and often. Deeply meaning until the water runs out the bottom. And I have a brick patio, and a lot of my pots are next to the pool. So between the reflected heat from the pool and the brick, things really get hot. So in the summer, I water once a day. So I'm going to show you some potential designs, but you have a lot of flexibility. And the important thing is try to plan for continuous bloom from, let's say, May through November. And you can do that by having perennials that bloom in succession, not all at the same time, and having a mix. And annuals give you, essentially, annuals are bred and born to flower in one season, then set seeds, and it's kaputski. So they stay in bloom for a very long time, and that's often very helpful to pollinators. I keep my pots, with the same plants through the beginning of November. Actually, this year was the middle of November, and it's almost as if the bees were saying, "Thank God, somebody still has some plants out here for us." And they looked a little straggly, but they were still providing that nectar and pollen. So, when we were planning this talk, Duong asked me the question, well, how big is big? What do you mean by a big pot? And here are some of my currently still empty pots. And this one is maybe, 14 to 16 inches across. This is 24. You can see how deep it is. And the picture, this photo is of a pot that's even bigger. I'm going to probably fill this with about 9 to 11 plants. It's really big. It'll stay in the same place all summer. It'll provide a lot of root room for plants, and it ought to look great too. So don't think dinky and small. That's going to cause you more work with watering and things drying out. Go as big as you can. Now, these pots happen to be, uh, what are they? Pottery. And if you really can't keep them full of soil and plants all winter because they'll split. But if you have fiberglass or plastic or metal, you can, or wood, you can, plant things that will go through the winter. And if we keep having winters like the recent ones, you know, things come back. So I'm going to very quickly talk about some design principles. Um, if you have multiples of different plants in your pots, as in this example, I just get rid of that so I can see it. There's an old formula that really does work. And it says that you need a thriller, a spiller, and a filler. So here's the thriller, kind of a tall plant that stands up. The spillers are the things that grow over the sides. And then the fillers are in the middle ground and make it look abundant. So that's one way of designing pots. And you can do it with plants in the same colorway or different colors. This happens to be my friend Ruth Ann's garden and her pots, and you can see there are lots of different colors here. And I just learned kind of a wonderful little formula for thinking about color. Sarah Raven in the UK says, think about having a bride, a bridesmaid, and a gatecrasher. So I think Ruth Ann has done that. Here's her bride. This little purple plant is a bridesmaid, and then you have the chartreuse gatecrasher. It's just one way of thinking about how to plan your pots. What's also effective, especially if you have several of several pots, is multiples of the same plant in a pot. But again, you serve the god of diversity by having several pots. We're going to look at doing a meadow in a pot using seed mixes, and of course, you can change them up seasonally or keep them through the whole season. I tend to maybe take out the tiredest looking plants in October and put in some chrysanthemum plants or something. But otherwise, I keep the same mix through November. So this is very quickly, we're just going to look at some thriller, spiller, filler arrangements. You can see that the height really makes a difference. This is Verbena bonariensis, which you'll see later, which is a fantastic pollinator-friendly annual that blooms all season, that's good in your border as well as in a pot. Looks great. Self-seeds like crazy. Once you have it, you'll have it forever. And here, this isn't so very pollinator friendly, but I thought it was an interesting pot to look at. And the nourishment here is coming from the alyssum. Okay. Here's some more ideas. This pot on the left does very well in shade. I've grown all of these plants, and they do very well in shade. They look great. They've got great color, and these particular plants, this is Verbena bonariensis. This is, I think, Verbena bolivianus, and this pretty little purple plant. The name I've forgotten it, but you can find it easily. These two are visited constantly by hummingbirds. I can almost time the time of day when hummingbirds are going to be on my patio looking for these plants. Again, the height makes a difference, and you can create more height by using a vine, a flowering vine. And they too are very pollinator friendly and look great. Window boxes are fantastic containers. If you're talking about getting plants onto a porch and you don't have room for pots, there are great ways of using window boxes on railings as well as in front of your windows. And I think these mixes are just fantastic. I especially love the one on the left with the foxglove and the salvia. Just really looking pretty and and attractive to pollinators. Now, there are two gardens that I particularly love that really specialize in front of their houses and having a single plant in a pot, or multiples of the same plant. This is Landcraft, um, which now has a foundation. They're in Mattituck. They grow plants wholesale, but they also have opened their garden. The garden's extraordinary. They've got lots of borders and different habitats, but around the house you can find all these plants in pots, and I think they just look fantastic. And this is Great Dixter in England, where they essentially do the same thing. This is an ever-changing display um, that looks fantastic, and also provides great nourishment. Dixter, by the way, um, did a kind of an ecological survey, and they found that their borders and these kinds of plantings had a richer insect life even than their very beautiful planted meadow, which had tons of wildflowers. So their point is that diversity of plantings really helps you draw in and support the insects. These are just pretty pictures of container designs with a single plant in the pot. This one is at Sissinghurst, and you probably know that tulips don't do so much for pollinators, but they do a lot for us at this time of year. Because we're really gardening for not only for our pollinator friends, but also for us. So tulips have been my salvation this particular spring. And remember that simple can be amazing and look just great. Here's a lavender that is very pollinator friendly. This is the Gartenmeister Bonestedt fuchsia. In fact, this was my fuchsia plant, and I'm surprised I actually got a photo without a hummingbird in it. And this is a very big planter, and it happens to be blooming at my house right now. And just one kind of tulip in this big pot is good. And so you can do one kind of perennial, one kind of annual in a very big pot and have it look fantastic. Now, the other kind of developing idea is that many of us would love to have meadows in our gardens and on our front yard. But if we can't have a meadow, or if we want to experiment with the plants that would go into a meadow, we can create a meadow in a pot. And the one on the left uses a variety of plants that were probably either full grown or plug plants that then grew together. I'm sure this middle one is from a seed mix. And here's another one that probably wasn't specifically designed to be meadowish, but is. And it has some very powerful pollinator-friendly plants here. And this is Agastache hyssop. And I don't know what the small one is, but these are attractive and not hard to do. And my sister happened to do these pots to test out a wildflower seed mix she'd been given, and got this, which I think is pretty incredible. The issue with wildflower seed mixes and creating meadows is that over time, the grasses in the mixes really take over. So you might get this in the first year, but probably not the second year. But it's still a fun way to see, well, what is in this wildflower seed mix, and do I like it, and can I use it? By the way, I think for Earth Day, a lot of different places are giving out seed mixes. I was on the Hamptons Jitney last week, and they gave out a pollinator seed mix that had been developed by Cornell CCE. So very credible seed mix, offered free to anybody who wanted it, and a lot of people took them. And you can test that out on a small piece of your property, but you can also do this and do a pot. Now, before we leave the topic of how to plant these things, I wanted to show you some cattle troughs that some friends of ours have planted in the city in the Bronx. They had a concrete backyard. They didn't have a way to create borders. So they bought, I think, 19 different troughs and have planted them up beautifully. And you can see classic natives here like coneflower and rudbeckia. That might be helenium, but I think it's rudbeckia. Here's orange asclepias. Here's Henry Eiler's rudbeckia. You can make a gorgeous mix in a huge trough. And for people who have voles on their property as a problem, Steve and Lewis have rats they need to worry about. It's been a great solution. And just one more view of that. I mean, can you believe this is a backyard in the Bronx? And they've been bitten by the native bug, so that they make sure that they have a lot of natives. And it's just worked wonderfully. And you can get these cattle troughs online easily, but also at the farm stores. So we're going to start talking about specific plants, but I want to just talk very quickly about the fact that Doug Tallamy and the Homegrown National Park crew have identified certain plants as keystone plants because 14% of them support 90% of the butterfly and moth species. And they've identified keystone plants by region. So for our region, which is largely Long Island, I mean, not broken up more than that, we have common sunflowers, goldenrod, black-eyed Susans, asters, vernonia, New York ironweed, and coneflowers. So these are kind of a short list of plants that are particularly powerful that you could consider or look for as you go plant shopping for plants for your pots. So again, I'm going to take you through just looking at a number of plants, starting with native perennials. On the left is Aquilegia. Oh, I'm sorry, Aquilegia, or columbine. And here's an interesting fact. Our native columbine, which this is pretty much synced up with hummingbird migration. So hummingbirds will be migrating back to our area shortly. It's probably a little too early for them to show up, but they're going to be looking for this plant. I think we all know about echinaceans and how powerful they are for both birds and insects. If you can get Echinacea purpurea, which is the native species, there are also some cultivars or nativars that are positive, but you want to have them so that it's this open format, unlike the echinaceas that look like little powder puffs. So generally speaking, single form flowers are more pollinator friendly than doubles. Penstemon is a fantastic pollinator plant. Look at this long tubular structure. Long-nosed bees, as well as hummingbirds, go for this and love it. And this Coreopsis, there are many varieties that are fantastic. You can see the open structure. You can see that butterflies, wasps, and bees can land on them very easily and get pollen and nectar from this central disc. They're easy to find. They'd look great in a pot. Penstemons get tall, but you might want to plant a tall plant to be the single plant in a big pot and just sitting there looking great. And they bloom for a long time. Now, Asclepias, butterfly weed, and Joe Pye weed are probably the two most easily available and iconic pollinator plants. And we're going to talk more about Asclepias in just a minute, butterfly weed. But this orange one is not thuggish in the garden or the pot. It blooms for a long time. It's very attractive. Joe Pye the species is huge. in one pollinator garden that we have in Quogue, it's like 7 feet tall now in year 3, or last year was year 3. So it's very tall. But there's one called Little Joe, a cultivar called Little Joe, which is more pot friendly. But you might want it because the bloom lasts a long time, and it's highly attractive to pollinators. Now, when you go out to buy milkweed, we all know that milkweed, common milkweed, is the only host plant for monarch butterflies. They will only lay their eggs and hatch caterpillars on the common milkweed. So it's why it's so important. And this is the plant that gets those beautiful seed cones that when they open, they have all that white fluff in them with seeds attached that go everywhere. And that fluff helps them travel. So if you can, if you don't have common milkweed in your yard, if you only have room for it in a pot, grow some. And if people complain about how it looks messy at the end of the season, the hell with them, it's important. The tuberosa is very well behaved and very beautiful. And swamp milkweed is also something that you can find and consider, and it's very beneficial for a number of different kinds of butterflies. Now, last year I began seeing, I'm going to mispronounce it, Carasavica, the tropical milkweed. A lot of people were selling it, and it's not recommended as a plant for this environment because butterflies typically encounter it farther south, and it's a signal to them that they're almost at the end of their journey. And of course, they won't be at the end of their journey on Long Island. So don't buy that. And you can probably find the other 3 more easily. There's also a plant that isn't in the Asclepias family. It's called, the common name is hairy balls milkweed for obvious reasons. You can find this. It's fun. It looks great in a pot. It's a conversation starter. And then look what happens. These are caterpillars that have hatched after laying eggs on that plant. So good nourishment. Moving on, this is probably the most important native perennial for high moisture situations. And you can make a high moisture situation in your pot. This is Lobelia cardinalis, a total hummingbird magnet, but because of the structure of the flower, it also attracts bees. And here we have Monarda, which is easy to find, very, very happy in a pot, beautiful. And again, even though it has these little structures coming up around the ray, the central core is very open, and plants can find it and use it. Now, these 2 plants probably attract the most bees of any other plant I've ever seen in our pollinator garden. Mountain mint, for some of the season, is just a bunch of gray leaves, silvery gray leaves. And then it blooms with these small white blossoms that are just so attractive to pollinators. If you have this in the ground, it spreads like mad. If you have it in a pot, you can contain it. Anise hyssop is a similar story. This, if you have it in the ground, it gets to be 4 or 5 feet tall. It'll be smaller in a pot, but it's a beautiful plant, and it's incredibly attractive to a number of different kinds of bees. And again, we're talking about resources for native bees. The farm bees are okay too, and you'll find them around in your neighborhood, but it's the native bees that are really at risk. So this is something to treat them with. And now that I just said that it's the natives that are at risk, we know that farm bees are also at risk, but probably for other reasons. Here are 2 plants that bloom late in the season and are just fantastic. Asters and goldenrod. And, even this color combination together looks fantastic. And the goldenrod, if you were to put in put it in a pot in May or June, would do nothing until August or September, but then it does this and looks beautiful. Same thing is true with asters, but very commendable and very attractive. And it's toward the end of the season that very often our pollinator friends are out there, kind of dying for sources of pollen and nectar. So consider them. And it's important to remember that there's a difference between goldenrod and ragweed. Ragweed is what we hate because it gives us horrible allergies. Goldenrod is not that. And no legitimate nursery will sell you ragweed as goldenrod. So you can reliably get goldenrod, and there are several different varieties available in the market that are all very positive. Okay, we're moving now to talking about annuals. And Doug Tallamy and Homegrown National Park has listed a bunch of native annuals that they say would be great in pots, but I'd never find them in our markets. We do have some sources of partridge pea and herb Robert or herb Robert. You can find these KMI plants in Lake Grove. I believe has both of them. And I've not seen them extensive. I haven't seen them in a lot of nurseries, but if anything's available, it's going to be one of these two. So you may be somebody who says, hey, I'm native all the way and I will only plant natives. If so, take a look for these. So we're now going to talk about superstar annuals that provide exceptional nectar and pollen for pollinators. Agastache or Agastaki, depending how you pronounce it, comes in many different colors. You'll see it's a long tubular flower. And this too attracts hummingbirds and lots of long-nosed bees. It has a long bloom period. You can get it in pinks, corals, oranges, lots of great varieties to find. And this is a simple plant, Alyssum, but it looks great all season. It blooms all season long. We put some in another pollinator garden and it was still in bloom in December, which was crazy. And then of course there was a super hard freeze and that was it. But this is available in nurseries now. It's a wonderful thing to put at the edge of a pot. And I think I have a photo of a pot with this later. But, don't overlook it. It's a little powerhouse of a plant. Black-eyed Susans and calendulas are no-brainers for pots. They look beautiful. They bloom for a long time. You can find them all over the place. They also calendulas grow very easily from seed. You could start them now. In fact, I have on my list for seed starting this week to start some calendulas. Bloom all season, extremely attractive to pollinators. Now, this is a plant I didn't even know about until about 4 years ago. Cupfia or cigar plant comes in this orange color or pink. And I think there's a red one that's called a bat face Cupfia that has that funny little look. But these plants bloom like crazy, are very sturdy, are kind of self-cleaning. They're not a mess. And pollinators just love them. I mean, who would have known? They're not fragrant for us, but pollinators are all over them. And here are some things that are common and easy to find, but they have pollinator benefits. Lantana comes in so many colors now, and you can see that it has these tiny flowers, but also a central ray. And that's a great addition to a container. Is a trailer. It's a trailer. So they've got some long stems and look great, on the edge of a pot. And good old lavender is another big bee attractant. And in our environment, we need to be sure to plant it. If we're planting it in the garden, it has to be in a very dry, sandy spot. They don't like super wet feet. but you could provide that in a pot. If lavender is your thing, use it with joy. The bees will love it. And it might last more than one season. I've had some in a pot that's coming into year 3. They look a little messy right now, but I'm going to cut them way back, and they'll regrow and they'll be fine. And there's a variety called Phenomenal that has been bred to put up with our wetter habitats here in the Northeast. Marigolds, which are a fantastic companion plant for tomatoes and other vegetables. They're fantastic as a companion plant because they attract pollinators. If you want your tomato plants and their flowers to get pollinated, plant marigolds at the base. Nasturtiums are another. Not only are the leaves and the flowers edible, but they're attractive to pollinators, and they go all season. Nicotiana is a plant that releases its scent in the evening. They're very attractive to moths. And you can see that they have a tubular structure, but this big, wide open face to attract moths. There's a variety called Sylvestris, which gets to be 4 feet tall. I'm going to put some in a pot this year. I think it'll look wonderful. I'll put some things at its feet, but don't rule these out. You can also get shorter Nicotianas in different colors. There's a beautiful green one. There are pinks and corals, and of course white. Now, who would have thought that the petunia, the lowly petunia, which I happen to love, is also a pollinator plant? These are attractive to pollinators. I think some of the other plants that we looked at are more so, but these bloom all season. They look great. They can help you out on your pot design. And here's another set of plants that we in the Northeast didn't grow so much before the last 10 years. But now, who doesn't grow salvias? And they're not native to Long Island. They're mainly coming from Mexico and Central America. And they're wildly attractive to not only hummingbirds, but bees. And they're very beautiful. You can get them in all kinds of colors. I had purples and corals and dark reds, and more of our nurseries are selling these. And there are some varieties that on the tag you'll see that they're going to be 7 feet tall. That's probably not what you want for your pot. But there's one called uliginosa, and I think this might be uliginosa, that throws out stems that are 3 to 4 feet tall, that look fantastic, waving in the wind above your pot with big fat bees all over it. So take a look at salvias, consider them. They also bloom quite late. Some of them don't start blooming until late, but most of the ones we can buy now in nurseries start blooming soon, meaning, May, June, and go on until frost. Snapdragons attract pollinators, and of course we have sunflowers. And there is one native perennial sunflower. If you are perennials all the way, my way or the highway, you can certainly find that. These are all annual sunflowers grown from seed. And, some have very tall stems, some are branching, some are a better size for pots. But, you can play with the color and the form of these and have them be your thriller in a pot. Now, on the left here is Tithonia, which is Mexican sunflower, which is a ginormous plant once it gets growing. I grew it in my cutting garden last year, and it got to be like 7 feet tall. My sister grows it in a pot. It's 4 feet tall. But if your concept is, I want a really tall plant that blooms all season, that attracts pollinators, that's these hot colors, here you go, Tithonia. You can start it from seed, but more and more of our nurseries are offering it. Now, we saw this plant earlier, Verbena bonariensis. Verbenas in general are pollinator plants, but this one is a superstar. Attracts lots of insects, looks great. It's kind of a nice thing to have in the front of the border, so you look through it, you look through these tall stems, and you can also do that in a pot. And then, of course, what could we do without zinnias? Zinnias are such a classic summer flower. You can grow them in pots. They come in a million different colors. And even the ones that look kind of double-ish have this central ray, this central place that the insects can easily find. And by insects, I mean bees and butterflies and moths in particular. There's a guy in a town near me in Manorville who grows corn tomatoes and a field of you-pick zinnias. And I went there one day last year and was surrounded by literally hundreds of butterflies. I mean, it was kind of crazy. And I felt badly about picking the zinnias because they were all over the zinnias, but I think there was enough for me and the zinnias. But don't overlook them. They're a common plant. You can buy them easily as seed. They start easily from seed. They start especially easily. Well, they start in the ground, or you can start them in pots. I'm starting some in pots this week because I'm going to have them for my planters, and they're fantastic. Okay, if you want to go vertical, there are a number of vines that have great flowers that are pollinator attractants. This is Thunbergia. I forget the common name, sorry. Butter and sugar plant? No, that's not it. But anyway, and cardinal climber. These cardinal climbers, will scramble up a trellis and bloom for weeks and weeks, look just great, attract insects. Moonflower blooms very late in the season. But if your concept is, I want a white pot with white flowers, this might be one to include if you can wait until late August, September for it to show up. Morning glories now come in many different colors. They are also very reliable in this climate. If you get small plants in late May, June, they'll be flowering by July. They're a great thing to mix with other plants in a pot, or just grow a pot of these. And you know the deal. They open in the morning and close in the afternoon, but in the morning they'll be covered with insects, including being visited by a hummingbird. Scarlet runner bean is another great plant, very attractive to pollinators. You need some running room for this. You probably need long bamboo poles to grow it on, or some other kind of trellis, but it's beautiful, and it even has beans. And then this is Mina lobata, or Spanish flag. And for some reason, these guys both bloom later in the season, but they're quite gorgeous. And cup and saucer and hyacinth beans are other vines you can consider. You can grow them from seed easily. I've seen them in nurseries now started as young plants. Cobea scandens is sort of a pain in the butt in that you have to start the seed actually in the winter. It takes a long time to come into bloom. If you're interested this year, probably better to find it in a nursery somewhere. But my goal here was to show you some things that may be new to you. So be creative, try some new things, do a mix of native perennials and annuals, pollinator friendly annuals. Ask for these kinds of plants when you go to the nursery. By the way, there is a handout, and I've listed a lot of these plants on the handout. So take your handout, go to the nursery and say, I want some of this. And if you make a pollinator pot, add your pot to the pollinator pathway. or to the Homegrown National Park. The experts say that every little bit helps. And if this is what we can contribute, it's fantastic. And think about a mosaic of pots, of pollinator pots in your town or neighborhood. I live in a neighborhood where people essentially grow lawn, privet hedges, and blue hydrangeas, like period. So, if I can get a few more neighbors to do these pots, the pollinators will have a place to travel to and a place to get some nourishment. So just very quickly, the Suffolk Alliance for Pollinators is an alliance, a loose grouping of all of these organizations who have decided we really want to collaborate and share information, share resources, share knowledge to support pollinators. So thanks a lot for listening to me tonight. And again, I come from the Horticultural Alliance of the Hamptons, as well as Westhampton Garden Club. And we're trying to bring the word to new gardeners, old gardeners, the general public. And you can certainly help do that as you plant these kinds of unusual pots and talk to people about why you have bees on your patio. By the way, where you place these is a strategic issue. I have them right outside my front door, right outside my bedroom door. I've never been stung. I'm thrilled to kind of go through this little group of plants that's covered with bees. But you might have a family member who isn't so much into that. So you'll find a place to put them where they're not going to bother people. But generally speaking, the pollinators don't bother us unless we sit on them or in some other way harm them. So anyway, thanks so much for listening. I see that there are a bunch of comments in the chat. I want to see what they are. I'm going to stop sharing right now. And let's go to chat.
Yes, thank you so much. That was so interesting. I've learned a lot.
Thank you.
It is very informative. A lot of people are sending their thank yous and very informative webinars. There is a question about soil. Like, do you use a commercial potting soil that we can just buy at the nursery or hardware stores?
Yes, there's a wonderful one called, I think it's State of Maine or Coast of Maine. Coast of Maine is the brand name. And they use like lobster bits and other kinds of compost sources in their mix. And they're the best soil that I've found so far. They're not cheap, but they're really great. And to that one, you don't even have to add additional compost. They also make a mix for raised beds, which I use, which is quite wonderful. But again, you can take, I'm forgetting the common name of it. It's that yellow and green logoed company that we see everywhere that you get at the supermarket. You can take that soil and add compost, and it's wonderful and useful.
Thank you. Do you use like those watering vessel, or how do you say it? The oleus, like the Spanish watering vessel on your pot?
My pot is so stuffed with plants, I don't have room for that.
Got it.
And I'm at home most of the time. I mean, I live now in Westhampton versus running back and forth between the city and Westhampton. So I'm here to water. So I don't need that. But if I were still doing that, I would consider using one of those. You can also use an old soda bottle and put water in it and then turn it upside down. Well, I'm not saying it the right way. There are things you can do to kind of drip water in if you're not there to water. You can also shove your planters into a shadier place. I mean, I had to play all those tricks when I was commuting and not there to water.
Watering is, I think, one of the biggest tasks with plants in pots. There's comments about swamp milkweed and butterfly milkweed. Somebody have them, and we see still monarch caterpillars, and they do turn into chrysalis and butterflies. So it's not only the common milkweed that is the host plant, right? It is a preferred host plant, but they would still lay egg on the swamp milkweed and the butterfly milkweed.
Yes, and that psychocarpus, the hairy balls.
Right. Okay. So, but
But
the common milkweed they are good in pots. As
yeah,
long as you,
well,
yes,
they're not particularly beautiful, but our definition of beauty is really changing a bit, isn't it? And
yes,
it's uh, so much of this depends on who are you living with, who's looking at this stuff with you. Do you have to are you a missionary for pollinators? Do you need to emphasize the beauty aspect to get people to tolerate the insect aspect? So a lot of that depends on sort of, what your situation is. But just about everybody has room somewhere to tuck a pot with common milkweed in it into a corner of your yard or your patio. But it's not necessarily going to be the dominant feature.
I think I'm going to do that because I'm a little afraid of common milkweed running amok, because they are quite a spreader. So I
There's
think pots is going to be the one for them.
Yeah, well, that they still might, spread, and you'll be taking them out of your lawn or your border, but that's a small price to pay. You can selectively weed them out later on.
Yes.
Um, by the way, there's a thing called the Mayor's Monarch Pledge, and in our area, the mayor of Quogue has signed it and has convinced now 3 other mayors on the East End to take the pledge and agree to do something to support monarchs. And what many of them are doing is seeding or planting milkweed. And they're getting their town DPW crews to recognize milkweed and not cut it down. Interesting, huh?
That is interesting. That's a great step forward. Yeah.
So
Somebody,
just looking at other things in the chat, I
mhm.
thought I read that sunflowers don't have pollen. I believe they do have pollen, and it could be certain types that don't. But you'll see insects working them when you see a sunflower field or when you have one in your yard. Um, and yes, the Mexican sunflower is a huge attractant. Oh, Molly Kirker has provided a comment here. Sunflowers have pollen, but lately flowers destined to be cut flowers have been bred to not have pollen because people didn't like pollen falling everywhere in their houses. But in the wild and in their natural state, they do have pollen. And if you're getting a seed packet, take a look to see what it says. You don't want the pollenless hybrid, crazy version. You want a real plant. And um, so many of these plants have their pollen spread by the wind, not to mention their seeds. So there's a Naz asks, what is a good source for organic and quality seeds? Gosh, there are so many. Um, prairie natives,
I
uh,
also use a seed saver
Seed Saver Exchange.
exchange.
Baker Creek has gorgeous seeds. Most of them are organic, quite wonderful. Over time, not yet, but Linpy, Long Island Native Plant Initiative, is going to be selling seed. They don't have it yet. They're too busy creating plants, but they'll eventually have it. Just,
And a question about your soil. Do you change out the soil each year?
I do. Or if I don't because I have a particularly gigantic pot, I refresh the top half of it.
And how,
I take
right,
out the top half and then I put compost in the bottom part, mix that up, and then put new soil in.
thank you.
And there,
And I'm sorry, there's another question about how do you overwinter perennials in pots?
well, it depends on the pot. What I said earlier is that it's probably not a good idea to leave them in ceramic pots because they will crack with the thawing and freezing. But fiberglass, plastic, metal, and wood, are like those cattle troughs, those big metal cattle troughs. Those all work for overwintering. If you have ceramic pots and if you have a garden, you might decide you like the plant enough that you want it to be grown in your garden, and you'll move it to the garden before November. But I have some pots that I leave outside all winter. We went through a period where it was just raining constantly, and I actually covered them with contractor bags to stop them from getting, so soaked all the time. So there's some little tricks you can do like that. But, ceramic pots, terracotta pots are going to crack. Unless you have a hoop house or a shed or a greenhouse. I have cold frames, but I can't shove my huge pots in the cold frames. A couple of big ones actually go in my shed. So, they winter it out in the shed, then come back out again in March.
And I think there's a follow-up question. So because you're changing the soil, then are you changing the soil for the perennials also, or that's when you start replanting them?
There, I'm top dressing with compost. Oh, we didn't talk about fertilizer. Given that these plants are growing in an unnatural environment and not getting as much nutrients as they would if they were in the ground, I use fertilizer. I use fish emulsion fertilizer that's diluted in water, fish emulsion seaweed mix fertilizer. And that tends to work really well. That's organic. You can find it. It's a liquid that you mix with water. The other thing is top dressing with compost. If I overwinter perennials and don't change out the soil, then I top dress with compost. Compost is the magic bullet. It just is. Suzanne is giving us a good tip. She keeps several perennials in pots over the winter and puts leaves and clippings on top to shelter the plants. Good thing. You can also cut up your holiday evergreens. I have a Christmas, I celebrate Christmas, I have a tree. I eventually cut it up, or actually when I'm setting it up, I cut off some of the branches and I use those on top of pots that I want to protect a bit. That helps.
And I think somebody also mentioned to me a long time ago, if you do a fence, like a chicken wire fence, and you just corral all the leaves together and put all your pots together inside it, that should also help it to protect it over the winter.
Good.
Yes. I don't see any more questions. I just want to say thank you again, Alicia. This is a great webinar. We learned a lot. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight.
Thank you, everybody. Really appreciate it. And have fun.
Thank you.
The plants are available now. We can get out there and get beautiful plants. For all of us who love plants, this is the best time of year. They're coming.
Yes.
As well as the insects, the bees. I have so many bees hanging around now. I just hope they make it for the next 2 nights, which are really cold nights. Yes. That's why it's good that we still have some leaves left in our borders so they can crawl under the leaves. I actually saw one doing that, a big bumblebee. It was going back under the leaves. So it's their version of a down blanket.
Yes.
Everybody, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thanks so much. Bye-bye.